What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. We're getting into the featherweights here. And at featherweight 126, the champions are Josh Warrington, Gary Russell Jr., Emanuel Navarrete, and Leo Santa Cruz, or Zhu Khan, depending on whether you want to recognize the super champion, Leo Santa Cruz, who hasn't fought at the weight class in almost 2 years and just got knocked out dramatically, versus Gervonta Davis up at 130, or if you recognize Zhu Khan, who defended his lesser belt 2 times successfully in 2019, but didn't fight in 2020. In fact, out of all these champs, Emanuel Navarrete is the only one who's fought in the division since the pandemic started, and he fought twice in 2020. Josh Warrington had an outstanding back-to-back in 2018, beating Lee Selby for the IBF title and then defending it successfully versus former champ Carl Frampton. Warrington, by the way, was a big underdog in both those fights. He also defended it successfully versus the number 4 ranked featherweight Kid Galahad. So although they're multiple champions, Josh Warrington is kind of sitting at number 1 at featherweight because of who he's beaten and how recently he beat them. I have doubts on whether Leo Santa Cruz, a longtime top featherweight, returns to 126. As I mentioned, he's got the WBA super champ status, but I think he'd rather stay at 130 and try working things out there, especially since Gervonta Davis appears to be setting his sights at 135 with the lightweights, although he said he wants to operate and campaign it at both 135 and 130. And remember, Davis just knocked Santa Cruz clean out at 130. So we'll see what Santa Cruz plans on doing next. He's 32 years old, but fighters tend to age quicker in some of these lower weight classes. Then there is Gary Russell Jr., who's held the WBC title since 2015 when he knocked Johnny Gonzalez out shortly after Johnny Gonzalez knocked Abner Mares out. Now, since Russell won the title, fight by fight, I don't know if I could think of a champion with a more frustrating fight schedule. So Russell's 2015 title win over Johnny Gonzalez was fantastic. That was his only fight in 2015. Since then, he has fought once every year. 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020 in his latest fight versus King Tug Nyambiar. That's 1 fight per year. Now, to his credit, a couple of these wins were versus solid opponents. Among them, Joey Jojo Diaz, who now has a belt up at 130. King Tug Nyambiar, Russell's latest opponent, appears to be pretty good as well. He's currently ranked number 7 in the division. But overall, Gary Russell Jr. has whiffed on fighting any of the guys who could elevate his legacy to Hall of Fame status. I believe him to have the fastest hands in the sport. He's one of these guys who you really have to see to believe. There's fast, there's super fast, and then there's Gary Russell Jr. His hand speed is really next level. The guy is tremendously gifted. But he just isn't fighting the fights that would matter most, nor is he fighting often enough to make anyone really care about him. He is fulfilling his WBC obligations versus his mandatories, and nothing else. So a few years ago, he missed the opportunity to fight the cream of the crop in the division, the biggest names, Leo Santa Cruz, Carl Frampton. Now he's just missed Shakur Stevenson, who left featherweight and moved up to 130. So right now, if you're Russell, if you're not fighting the remaining names at 126, meaning Josh Warrington, IBF champ, who's ranked number 1 featherweight by ring, or Emanuel Navarrete, the WBO belt holder who's fighting often and is really looking good on ESPN. If you're not planning to fight either of those guys, then what the hell are you still doing at featherweight? Unless it's simply about the belt holding meriting more money per fight. Maybe that's it. But the biggest names are now moving to 130, and Gary Russell Jr. is now 32 years old, so the clock's ticking. So unless you're satisfied with holding that one belt and defending it once a year versus guys who nobody really heard of outside of like the deepest boxing fans, then you've got to take a chance versus one of these new guys. You could go to 130 and call out Shakur Stevenson. You could try fighting Gervonta Davis at 130, who's under the same promotional banner. These are both PBC guys. Seriously, if Russell doesn't either start unifying these featherweight titles or take on like the most exciting challenges that await him at 130, or at least fight Leo Santa Cruz, whom he's already probably missed the boat on, this would all be a career travesty. He basically let Tank Davis come in, knock Santa Cruz out, and then take all of the glory that would have gone to Russell had he beaten Santa Cruz. And Russell and Santa Cruz have both been Al Haymon fighters for years, so I don't get what the excuse there is. Man, these last few years have been frustrating to witness in Russell's career. As it stands, Russell is rumored to be fighting Tomoki Kameda from Japan next. Kameda's 36-3, but doesn't really have any wins worth mentioning. He's coming off a decision loss versus Ray Vargas, and that loss was back in July of 2019. So Russell is now fighting a guy who hasn't fought in a year and a half, and that was a loss. I swear, if this ends up being Russell's only 2021 fight, I've got to give up hope that he'll truly live up to those high expectations that come with that level of pure talent and ability. Russell has only one career loss, and that was to Lomachenko in Lomachenko's third professional fight all the way back in 2014. So Russell hasn't lost in 6 years, but again, he just isn't active enough and isn't fighting any of the guys who we want to see him in there with. The time to step it up is now. Now elsewhere, Gary Russell Jr. aside, I believe that the best fight that this division has to offer would be Josh Warrington versus Emanuel Navarrete, a unification bout between those two. They both have very busy, high-volume styles, and although Warrington is more of an accomplished champion, something about Navarrete's long reach, his volume, his deceptive punching angles, and his power might give Warrington some real trouble. I'd love to see that fight. If Leo Santa Cruz does end up returning to featherweight, then he versus Russell, Warrington, or Navarrete would also be exciting. Now, Zhu Khan, that lesser WBA belt holder, can also get in the mix here with one of these guys. Now, he's promoted by Golden Boy and fights on DAZN, so maybe he versus Eddie Hearn's Josh Warrington, who also fights on DAZN, would be the fight to make. In fact, I think I might have just read something where they were trying to make that fight between Warrington and Zhu Khan. That would be good. So this can be an exciting division, but it would require at least a couple of these champions fighting each other, especially Russell, Warrington, and Navarrete. Guys who unfortunately each have a different promoter. But let me know your thoughts on the featherweight division. Other things worth mentioning is Joette Gonzalez's win over Miguel Mariaga. Now, if you remember, Shakur Stevenson was supposed to fight Miguel Mariaga just as COVID was hitting. So, like the day before the fight, they canceled it. Shakur Stevenson ends up finally having his fight a few months later, well into the pandemic. And then they make the fight between Joette Gonzalez, who Shakur Stevenson had just fought in his prior fight. Remember, Shakur Stevenson was dating Joette Gonzalez's girlfriend, might still be, but there was some bad blood going into that one. Shakur Stevenson kind of dominated Joette Gonzalez, didn't stop him, but won just about every round. Joette Gonzalez fights the guy who Stevenson was supposed to fight just as COVID's breaking, Miguel Mariaga, who's a pretty well-tested vet. He's one of these guys who's only really lost to the best in the division. And Joette Gonzalez upsets Miguel Mariaga. Like, he really takes it to him. I don't know if COVID training has something to do with Mariaga's, lack of preparation. But Joette Gonzalez surprised a lot of people with that win. Signature win for him, at least up to this point. And King Tug Nyambiar, who had his first and only loss versus Gary Russell Jr. in the beginning of 2020 before COVID hit, about a month before COVID hit, he won his next fight later on in 2020. So he's going to be somebody to watch in the future of this division. Isaac Dogboe, if he decides to stick around at featherweight, he just had his first and second loss, both against Emanuel Navarrete. That was in 2018, and then in 2019, Navarrete took his title and then beat him again in the rematch. Difficult fights for Dogboe, man. He went from being undefeated and kind of being the pride of Ghana, winning a big fight over Jesse Magdaleno, and then he runs into Navarrete and loses a unanimous decision the first time around and then gets stopped in the 12th round of the rematch. But Isaac Dogboe, if he's fully recovered, back in the mix, he's still really young, 26 years old. if he sticks around at featherweight, he's another guy to watch out for there. So you definitely do have some interesting action and some things that could develop here. Again, I just want to see the champions fight the champions. But please, leave your comments in the comments, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.